Nearly 3 decades have passed since the heartbreaking loss of JonBenét Ramsey, and her case remains one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. No arrests, no closure, just endless questions. Countless investigators have pored over the evidence, building theories and chasing leads, but few have been as bold as Dr. Cyril Wecht, the forensic powerhouse who didn't hesitate to point the fin directly at John Ramsey. With his razor-sharp analysis, Wecht dropped 11 explosive bombshells that shattered assumptions and exposed hidden truths. But what if those revelations hold the key we've all been missing? Are we ready to confront the uncomfortable possibilities they raise?
Was asked for in this ransom note? $118,000. It's a nice round number, right? Exactly the amount of money that John Ramsey had been paid as a bonus from his company the year before. How many people would have known John Ramsey's bonus of $118,000? And now this kidnapper, who has found a way to come into the house without awakening anybody, knowing where her room is, not awakening her that she would cry out, the brother Bert, 3 years older, just a few feet away, not awakening him or the parents, and he knows about a back set of stairs that go down into the basement that a maid who had worked there for 6 months never knew existed.
Dr. Siril Wet emerged as one of the first prominent experts to publicly cast suspicion on John Ramsey, identifying him as a logical suspect from the very beginning of his involvement in 1997. Wecht's doubt was rooted in the absence of any intruder traces, such as footprints in the snow or foreign fingerprints, which he argued pointed directly to someone within the household, with John standing out due to his central role as the family patriarch. He openly accused John by name in interviews and writings, yet remarkably faced no legal repercussions from the Ramseys, who had pursued lawsuits against others making comparable claims. This lack of response struck Wecht as telling, potentially indicating a strategic avoidance of depositions that might reveal damaging information. Wecht expressed his skepticism through pointed sarcasm, remarking that if an outsider were truly responsible, his hair would grow to his shoulders, underscoring his conviction that the events originated internally and implicated John. John's behavior and responses during interrogations added to Wecht's doubts, as transcripts revealed answers that supported notions of staging. The delayed cooperation with authorities, holding off interviews for months, struck Wecht as indicative of concealment. He aligned with detective observations of John's demeanor at the scene, where locked eyes conveyed dishonesty. Moreover, John's reference to another high-profile trial as a cautionary tale implied wariness about legal pursuit, which Wecht saw as a subtle admission of vulnerability. Logically, Wecht reasoned that the case's unique complexity and elaborate setup eliminated outsiders, leaving John as the key figure responsible. Trace evidence aligning with domestic items contradicted external involvement, while Wecht's comparisons to other investigations underscored how affluence could shield prominent individuals like John from swift action. The selective legal responses from the Ramseys, suing others but sparing Wecht despite his direct accusations, suggested to him a calculated effort to evade scrutiny that might expose John's role. In his 1998 book, Wecht compiled public records like the autopsy and scene photos to reinforce John's position as the primary suspect. Inconsistencies in accounts and physical clues at the site indicated to Wecht a cover-up orchestrated by John, with the compromised environment still yielding enough indicators given his control over the premises and his finding of the body. This comprehensive scrutiny painted John as not just a suspect but a logical one based on the evidentiary mosaic. About the background, Dr. Cyril Wecht, born in 1931 and passing in 2022, was a renowned forensic pathologist, lawyer, and medical examiner whose career spanned decades of groundbreaking work in high-profile investigations. As the longtime coroner for Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, he conducted over 17,000 autopsies and consulted on thousands more, earning the moniker, Sherlock Holmes of forensic medicine, for his meticulous analyses. Wecht's dual expertise in medicine and law set him apart, allowing him to testify as an expert witness in numerous trials and contribute to public understanding of complex cases through his writings and media appearances. One of Wecht's most notable achievements came in the 1960s and 1970s with his involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. As a critic of the Warren Commission's single bullet theory, Wecht conducted independent reviews of the autopsy materials and testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978, arguing that the evidence suggested multiple shooters. His work challenged official narratives and influenced ongoing debates, cementing his reputation as a fearless skeptic of government conclusions. Wecht's contributions extended to the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, where he examined ballistic evidence and questioned the lone gunman hypothesis, further establishing him as a key figure in forensic reevaluations of historical events. In the 1990s, Wecht played a significant role in the OJ Simpson trial, consulting on forensic aspects such as blood spatter and wound patterns. His critiques of evidence handling highlighted procedural flaws that the defense exploited, contributing to discussions on how investigative errors can sway outcomes in celebrity cases. Wecht's involvement in the death of Elvis Presley in 1977 involved reviewing toxicology reports to dispute overdose claims, attributing it to cardiac issues instead, which sparked public interest in celebrity autopsies. He also analyzed the Vincent Foster case in 1993, ruling it a suicide based on forensic details, amid conspiracy theories surrounding the White House aide's death. Wecht's career included consultations on the Waco siege in 1993, where he examined remains from the Branch Davidian compound to assess causes of death, and the Anna Nicole Smith case in 2007, determining accidental overdose through drug interactions. His work on the Martin Luther King assassin in 1968 paralleled his JFK efforts, questioning ballistics and timelines. These achievements showcased Wecht's ability to blend pathology with legal acumen, often leading to controversial but influential opinions that shaped public discourse. Beyond investigations, Wecht authored or co-authored over 40 books on forensic science and true crime, blending technical detail with accessible narratives. His 1993 book, Cause of Death, examined famous cases like OJ Simpson and David Koresh, creaking investigative processes. Tales from the Morgue in 2005 shared professional anecdotes, while A Question of Murder in 2008 delved into unsolved mysteries. Wecht's autobiography, The Life and Deaths of Cyril Wecht, in 2020 recounted his career's highlights, including clashes with authorities over his outspoken views. The timing of Wecht's book on the relevant case, published in 1998, coincided with a pivotal moment in the investigation, just 18 months after the events and shortly after a major evidence presentation to the district attorney in June of that year. Wecht began his involvement in early 1997, prompted by a reporter providing autopsy photos, which spurred him to write amid growing public intrigue and media frenzy.
National tabloids, I think it was the National Enquirer or Globe, one of the two, and asked me if I would review some pictures they had. I said, sure. It happens with me all the time. So they sent me these pictures, and I see there's this little girl, JonBenéт Ramsey. She's not.
The book's release aligned with heightened scrutiny, as authorities debated next steps, allowing Wecht to influence discussions with his forensic insights. This context positioned the work as timely commentary, challenging delays and advocating for accountability based on available evidence. Wecht's prolific output, including earlier titles like Grave Secrets, in 1996 on forensic techniques, demonstrated his commitment to educating on pathology's role in justice, with the 1998 volume fitting into his pattern of addressing contemporary controversies. In his 1998 interview, Dr. Cyril Wecht, a renowned forensic pathologist and lawyer, unveiled a series of 11 bombshells that shook public discourse on a high-profile investigation, offering explosive insights drawn from his early access to key materials like autopsy photos and reports. These revelations emerged at a critical juncture, just days after law enforcement's exhaustive two-day evidence presentation to the district attorney, a moment when the entire probe hung in the balance, teetering between potential charges and indefinite stagnation. Wecht's commentary, delivered with the authority of his dual expertise in medicine and law, served as a timely intervention, challenging the official narrative and urging swift action, amid growing frustrations over procedural delays. The bombshells primarily targeted figures central to the inquiry, including family members like John and Patsy Ramsey, whom Wecht implicated through forensic scrutiny and logical deductions, as well as District Attorney Alex Hunter, whom he accused of undue hesitation that bordered on obstruction. By extension, they critiqued the broader Boulder justice system, exposing perceived inefficiencies and biases that favored caution over conviction. Wecht's pointed remarks spared no one in positions of power or privilege, highlighting how affluence and prominence could insulate individuals from accountability, drawing parallels to other notorious trials where similar dynamics played out. At their core, these 11 bombshells revolved around Wecht's overarching hypothesis that the events were an internal affair, meticulously staged to mislead investigators rather than the work of an external perpetrator. He wove together threads of forensic anomalies, evidentiary gaps, and behavioral inconsistencies to support a narrative of cover-up and deception, insisting that the absence of outsider traces demanded a re-evaluation of those closest to the situation. Wecht's assertions championed a theory of familial involvement, bolstered by his predictions of legal developments like grand jury referrals and potential indictments, all while dissecting systemic flaws that allowed such matters to languish unresolved. The value of these disclosures was immense at the time of their revelation, as they pierced the veil of official silence during a period of intense media speculation and public impatience. Released amid swirling rumors and just as competing narratives from other experts began to surface, Wecht's bombshells provided a counterweight, grounding discussions in pathology and law rather than conjecture. They amplified calls for transparency, influencing contemporary debates and even foreshadowing later procedural shifts, such as the eventual convening of a grand jury. By sharing leaked insights and his professional interpretations, Wecht not only humanized the complexities of forensic work, but also empowered the public to question authority, fostering a legacy of scrutiny that endured long after the interview aired. His willingness to stake his reputation on these points underscored the bombshells' role as catalysts, sparking renewed vigor in an otherwise stalled process and highlighting the interplay between evidence, justice, and power. So, let's go to what Wecht tried to show us.
I wanted to write the book because I felt, number one does not know as we sit here today whether anything will ever happen in a definitive nature, although I have some belief that it will, and I'll mention it later. So the idea, well, why not wait until later? That would mean maybe wait forever.
Dr. Cyril Wecht's first bombshell in his 1998 interview centered on his deep skepticism that the case would ever reach a definitive resolution, suggesting that the lack of progress might be by design, forcing an endless wait for justice. He argued that writing his book early was essential, because delaying for more developments could mean waiting forever, as the investigative machinery seemed stalled despite available evidence. Wecht pointed out that while police had built a compelling case, the district attorney's office appeared reluctant to act, creating a scenario where the matter might languish indefinitely. This doubt stemmed from his observation of bureaucratic inertia and potential external influences that could perpetuate the stalemate. This bombshell remains strikingly accurate in the present day, as the case continues to evade closure nearly 3 decades later, with no arrests or trials in sight. Recent updates from bolder authorities underscore this ongoing limbo, as their annual review was released a month early this year, reiterating commitments to re-examine old evidence, but offering no concrete breakthroughs. The persistence of this unresolved status raises questions about whether modern technologies could finally tip the scales toward resolution. Advances in genetic genealogy and enhanced DNA analysis have been touted as potential game changers, with efforts underway to apply these tools to unidentified samples from the scene. For instance, items like cords and other traced using cutting-edge methods that could link profiles to familial databases, potentially identifying long-overlooked connections. Yet, skepticism lingers about their efficacy here, given past controversies over sample contamination and the limitations of degraded evidence. Experts debate if these technologies, successful in other cold cases, might falter due to the specific forensic challenges involved, such as mixed profiles or insufficient quantities for reliable matches. This technological uncertainty amplifies Wecht's original doubt, as even with these innovations, progress feels incremental at best. Compounding this is the notable shift in media control, now largely dominated by John Ramsey himself, who has become the primary narrator shaping public discourse. Through appearances at events like CrimeCon this year, Ramsey has shared hopeful updates on DNA retesting and advocated for new legislation to empower families in unsolved investigations, positioning himself as a tireless seeker of truth. His influence extends to interviews and documentaries, where he steers conversations toward external theories and criticizes past handling, effectively managing the narrative to emphasize ongoing efforts while downplaying internal scrutiny. This control echoes Wecht's concern about design delays, as Ramsey's prominence might inadvertently or intentionally divert attention from unresolved questions, keeping the case in a perpetual holding pattern. Media outlets often amplify his voice, with recent reports framing advancements through his lens, which could influence public perception and investigative priorities.
Number two, it's truly unique.
Wecht's second bombshell highlighted the case's truly unique nature, characterized by an extraordinary level of elaborate staging that set it apart from typical investigations. He described the ransom note as deserving an Oscar for its dramatic flair, either as the best or worst special effects in a real-life drama, underscoring the theatrical elements that bewildered authorities. The pageantry, including the note's length and absurdity, combined with the absence of clear intruder signs, made the scenario unlike anything Wecht had encountered in his extensive career. He emphasized how this uniqueness overwhelmed the Boulder team, who operated in a relatively peaceful environment, and were unprepared for such deception. As the one above, this assessment holds firm today, as the case is still celebrated, or lamented, as one of the most singular enigmas in American forensic history, with its staging complexities continuing to fuel debates and analyses. Modern true crime enthusiasts and experts alike revisit the ransom note's peculiarities, noting its verbose style and movie-like quotes as hallmarks of contrived effort rather than genuine criminal intent. The staging's intricacy, from the placement of items to the overall narrative construction, remains a benchmark for discussions in criminology circles. often cited in podcasts and forums as a prime example of how deception can confound even seasoned investigators. Recent documentaries and series have amplified this uniqueness, dissecting the elements that Wecht first spotlighted, such as the note's alignment with household materials and its failure to match standard kidnapping patterns. The bombshell's enduring relevance is evident in how contemporary technologies and methodologies struggle to unravel the staging's layers. Genetic tools, while promising, must contend with the possibility of intentional misdirection embedded in the scene, where physical evidence might have been manipulated to obscure truths. Analysts in 2025 point out that the case's distinctiveness lies in this blend of apparent sophistication and clumsiness, like a perpetrator who executes a flawless entry but leaves an overly elaborate clue. This paradox keeps it unique, as similar cases rarely combine such high-profile media frenzy with forensic puzzles that resist resolution. Wecht's insight into the staging's off-the-scale nature prefigured today's ongoing fascination, where experts use AI-enhanced reconstructions to model scenarios, yet still grapple with the same deceptive core he identified.
Ramsey's paper and felt point pen, so he just assumed, I guess, as an intelligent, affluent family, that he would find pen and paper there. And he wasn't concerned about being found out. He took more than a half an hour writing with his left hand. He wrote this 3-page note, which is really, if it weren't for the tragedy, the death of a little girl, this note would be one of the great laughing things. You can tell a great joke about it. Then, after having written the note, you know what he forgot? He forgot to take the child with him. So he left the note, and he left the child.
Doctor's third bombshell in his 1998 interview revolved around his assertion that the ransom note was penned with the left hand, a detail he believed significantly narrowed the pool of potential authors to someone left-handed or ambidextrous. He highlighted this as a clever disguise tactic, mocking the absurdity of the scenario where the writer supposedly spent over half an hour crafting the lengthy message with their non-dominant hand, only to inexplicably leave the child behind. Wecht used this point to underscore the note's contrived nature, arguing it wasn't the work of a hasty intruder, but rather someone deliberately altering their style to evade identification. This observation fit into his broader critique of the evidence, suggesting the note's execution required familiarity and time, traits inconsistent with an outsider's rushed operation. Handwriting experts involved in the case, as discussed in various analyses, supported elements of Wecht's claim by examining disguised writing techniques. For instance, forensic document examiners noted that the note's slant appeared jerky and inconsistent, characteristics often seen when someone writes with their offhand to mask their natural script. One story that emerged from the investigation involved Patsy Ramsey, providing a left-hand sample during police questioning, which, including amateur analysts on online forums, described as an exact match to the note's style. This sample, taken under controlled conditions, featured similar letter formations and pen pressure variations, convincing some that it revealed a deliberate attempt at disguise. Anecdotes from those close to the process recounted how Patsy's ambidextrous abilities, her reported comfort using both hands, added intrigue, with one video analysis even joking about selling oceanfront property in Nebraska to skeptics who dismissed the possibility of her involvement due to handedness. These tales circulated widely in true crime circles, painting a picture of a meticulous examination where left-handed writing became a focal point for suspicion. Wecht's emphasis on the left-handed aspect drew from comparisons between the note and known samples, where experts like those consulted by authorities observed pointed or oval bowls in letters like B and stemmed ors that hinted at forced alteration. In one recounted episode from the Handwriting Wars, a friend of Patsy's, Judith Phillips, provided insights into her script, noting resemblances even in disguised forms. Stories from the era described heated debates among examiners, with some arguing that forging a one-page document convincingly with the non-dominant hand was improbable for most people, yet possible for someone practiced or ambidextrous. This led to narratives about how the note's verbose content, filled with movie-like phrases and unnecessary details, would have demanded sustained effort, further implicating a composed insider rather than a panicked stranger. Controversies surrounding the left-handed claim fueled arguments that it didn't sufficiently tighten the net, as no one fully matched the profile without caveats. For example, while Patsy's samples showed similarities in slant and jerkiness when written left-handed, experts clashed on whether this constituted proof or mere coincidence, with some dismissing it as too subjective. Stories from the investigation recounted instances where alternative suspects, like potential intruders, were briefly considered but discarded due to handedness mismatches or lack of writing samples. One narrative involved a suspect whose right-handed script didn't align, yet the absence of a clear left-handed culprit outside the family circle amplified skepticism. This led to ongoing disputes in forensic communities, where the bombshell was praised for innovative thinking but criticized for not yielding an arrestable figure, as handwriting analysis remained inconclusive despite advanced comparisons using similar instruments. The contention persisted that while it theoretically honed in on ambidextrous or left-dominant individuals, the lack of a definitive match created more questions than closures. Anecdotes from later reflections illustrated how the left-handed theory influenced public perception, with online discussions revisiting Patsy's sample as a smoking gun that never fully ignited. In one tale, a document examiner reportedly the note with the same scrutiny as the handwriting tests, yet fingerprints and other traces complicated the narrative, blending the bombshell into broader evidentiary puzzles. This interplay highlighted the bombshell's double-edged nature. It sharpened focus on disguise tactics, but sparked debates over why no suspect perfectly fit, underscoring the challenges in applying such details to real-world probes.
Think about it.
Cyril, how about the fact that there was snow on the ground? There are no footsteps.
No
Footsteps.
no
coming into the
fingerprints
house.
in the house, not a thread, a fiber, a hair, not a biological specimen of sweat, saliva, semen, or blood. This person who had the incredible ability, agility, adroitness, and cleverness to come into the house, leaving no point of breaking and entering, no point of exiting, who took his good old time, who knew where to go to the bedroom, could take her from the second floor to the basement without causing any disturbance, could engage in this game, and do all of
Dr. Cyril Wecht's fourth bombshell focused on the complete absence of intruder evidence, asserting that no footprints appeared in the snow, no fingerprints marked surfaces, and no threads, fibers, hairs, or biological traces like sweat, saliva, semen, or blood belonged to an outsider. He portrayed the supposed intruder as possessing extraordinary agility and cleverness, capable of entering and exiting without any signs of forced access, silently navigating to the bedroom, transporting the victim downstairs without causing a stir, yet inexplicably forgetting to take JonBenét's and leaving behind a verbose, bogus ransom note. This contradiction formed the crux of Wecht's argument. The intruder's meticulous invisibility clashed with the clumsy, unnecessary elaboration of the note, which served no practical purpose in a real kidnapping and instead screamed fabrication. Wecht delved into this inconsistency by emphasizing how a truly skilled perpetrator would avoid such a glaring self-incrimination, suggesting the note's length and detail pointed to internal staging rather than external execution. The lack of any disturbance or entry point further undermined the outsider narrative, as it implied knowledge of the home's layout and routines, traits more aligned with familiarity than random intrusion. He mocked the idea of a superhuman criminal who executed flawlessly in evasion but faltered spectacularly in logic, using this paradox to argue that the evidence, or lack thereof, demanded a revaluation away from intruder theories towards something more contained. This bombshell clashed sharply with the views of Lou Smith, a veteran detective who championed the intruder hypothesis after joining the investigation. Smith contended that certain marks resembled stun gun impressions, a high-tech boot print suggested an outsider's footwear, and a suitcase positioned near a window indicated an escape route, while an undisturbed spider web in a basement window implied no entry there but possibly elsewhere. He interpreted these as direct signs of an external perpetrator, building a case around overlooked physical clues that painted a picture of lated break-in by someone unknown to the household. The core conflict between Wecht and Smith lay in their interpretations of forensic gaps versus isolated findings. Wecht saw the absence of comprehensive traces, such as consistent footprints or biological residues, as definitive proof against an intruder, arguing that Smith's evidence suffered from overinterpretation. For instance, the stun gun marks could stem from other causes, the boot print belonged to unrelated visitors, and the suitcase's placement lacked contextual proof of use in entry or exit. This revealed a fundamental divide. Wecht prioritized the holistic lack of intruder artifacts, viewing fragmented clues as red herrings that didn't cohere into a logical external act, while Smith focused on piecing together those fragments to construct an intruder profile, downplaying the improbability of zero broader traces in such a complex maneuver. Their arguments intertwined around the ransom note's role, where Wecht highlighted its internal contradictions as evidence of staging that negated Smith's theory, insisting a real intruder wouldn't risk such exposure. Smith, conversely, treated the note as a genuine artifact from an outsider, perhaps intended to mislead, but Wecht countered that its bogus nature and JonBenét's presence inside demolished that logic, exposing flaws in assuming an intruder's mindset. This back and forth exposed mutual weaknesses. Smith's reliance on speculative connection risked confirmation bias, linking unrelated items without addressing the evidentiary void Wecht stressed, whereas Wecht's dismissal of those items as irrelevant invited accusations of ignoring potential leads, creating a stalemate in weighing absence against ambiguity. Touch DNA emerged as another flashpoint, with Smith using unidentified male profiles to bolster his intruder claim, interpreting them as direct transfers from a perpetrator. Wecht, however, argued these could result from contamination during manufacturing or handling, pointing to the profile's weakness and inconsistency with a violent act. The debate hinged on whether such minimal traces represented true intrusion or forensic artifacts, with each side accusing the other of selective emphasis. Smith on presence as proof, Wecht on context rendering it meaningless. This mutual critique underscored deeper methodological rifts, where Wecht demanded overarching coherence to dismiss isolated anomalies, while Smith built narratives from those anomalies, each opposing the other's potential for overlooking nuances in the pursuit of a unified theory.
Why, with everything that you have just laid out in front of us, have the Boulder Police not been able to make a case?
The Boulder police feel that they have made a case sufficient to proceed, and they've been knocking on the door of the DA for more than 1 year. It is the DA, Alex Hunter, who has dragged his feet.
Okay.
And now you get into some interesting questions. Why?
Okay, now,
Dr. Cyril Wecht's fifth bombshell asserted that Boulder police had assembled a sufficient case for prosecution more than a year earlier, yet the district attorney's office, under Alex Hunter, persistently delayed action. He pointed to the police's frustration, noting they had been pressing Hunter for over a year to move forward, particularly after their detailed two-day presentation in early June 1998. This session laid out forensic findings, witness accounts, and other materials, with investigators explicitly urging a grand jury due to its ability to compel testimony and documents. Wecht highlighted this as a clear indicator of readiness, arguing the evidence warranted immediate steps rather than prolonged hesitation. The delay became evident when Hunter, despite the presentation, took months to decide, announcing in August 1998 that he would convene a grand jury but not acting swiftly. Calls from former associates of the subjects for a special prosecutor underscored the perceived stagnation, as the investigation had dragged on for nearly 2 years without charges. When the grand jury finally convened in September 1998, it reviewed extensive materials including DNA samples and handwriting analyses, ultimately voting in 1999 to indict on counts related to child abuse resulting in death. However, Hunter refused to sign the indictments, publicly stating there was insufficient evidence for a trial, a decision that fueled widespread criticism of his handling. This refusal amplified Wecht's point, as it suggested a disconnect between police confidence and prosecutorial caution, potentially influenced by evidentiary concerns or external pressures. In recent developments, the pattern of slow progress persists, with annual updates from Boulder police reiterating commitments to review but yielding few advancements. Their November 2024 statement, released a month early, stressed that DNA testing remains central yet progresses gradually due to limited samples, echoing historical frustrations over pace. Efforts to digitize and reassess materials from a cold case team, as noted in late 2023 reviews, continue under joint police and DA oversight, but no charges have materialized. Advocacy for new legislation to allow independent reviews of stalled inquiries, pushed in September 2025, underscores the enduring impact of these delays, aiming to empower external evaluations where official processes falter. Former DA Hunter's media appearances in late 2024 reaffirmed hopes for closure, yet the absence of resolutions validates Wecht's early critique of protracted handling.
No, of course, there's nothing wrong with convening experts and consulting them. That's fine. Does he need them for this particular purpose? No. Nevertheless, if that gives him the window dressing that he feels he needs, fine. I predict, as I sit here with you today, that before the end of this month, Alex Hunter will announce that he is turning the case over to the grand jury. He already made a statement following the second day that he had seen some new evidence. That was the significance of the statement was that it came from Hunter, you see, who has been so reticent in making a move. And the Commander Beckner from the police department, who's in charge of this case, he made an even stronger statement. Said he, 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that I believe I know who did this. Now, statements like that have a purpose. You know, they're not being made by children. They're being made by people in charge. That's setting the stage for turning the case over to the grand jury.
Similar to the fifth one, Jutrat, Cyril Wecht's sixth bombshell in his 1998 interview delivered a sharp critique of District Attorney Alex Hunter, accusing him of dragging his feet in advancing the investigation despite mounting evidence from police. Wecht portrayed Hunter's approach as unnecessarily cautious, highlighting how the DA convened a panel of experts, including Barry Scheck and Henry Lee, in early June 1998 to evaluate whether to pursue a grand jury, which he dismissed as mere window dressing, a superficial exercise to justify inaction. He argued that Hunter didn't need such consultations to make a straightforward decision, suggesting this was a form of legal pageantry that masked deeper reluctance. Wecht's frustration stemmed from his belief that police had already compiled a solid foundation for charges, yet Hunter's delays allowed the process to stagnate, creating an impression of bureaucratic inertia that favored hesitation over decisive steps. Wecht's prediction added punch to his criticism, as he confidently stated that Hunter would announce referring the matter to a grand jury before the end of that month, framing it as an inevitable outcome despite the foot dragging. Although the actual announcement came in August 1998, slightly later than forecasted, it validated Wecht's insight into Hunter's trajectory, with the grand jury convening in September and deliberating for over a year. The panel's eventual vote to indict on certain counts, revealed years later in 2013 court documents, underscored Wecht's point that evidence existed to proceed, but Hunter's refusal to sign those indictments exemplified the very delays Wecht decreed. This override, where Hunter publicly claimed insufficient grounds for trial, fueled debates about prosecutorial discretion and whether personal or political considerations influenced his choices, amplifying Wecht's scorn for what he saw as unnecessary postponements. The fallout from Hunter's handling drew broader scrutiny, with calls for a special prosecutor emerging from various quarters, reflecting dissatisfaction with the DA's pace. Wecht used this bombshell to illustrate how such reluctance could erode public trust, pointing to the grand jury's extended timeline, meeting sporadically until October 1999, as evidence of systemic sluggishness. Even after the jury's dismissal without filed charges, the underlying tensions persisted, leading to shifts in oversight, such as police reclaiming the lead in 2009. Wecht's critique resonated in later reflections, where Hunter's decisions were dissected for potentially allowing media leaks and external pressures to complicate matters further, a pattern that Wecht had spotlighted early on as emblematic of flawed leadership in high-stakes probes.
Do you see any similarity between this case and the OJ case? Money buying justice, maybe?
There are some similarities.
You were very involved in
To begin with, the bungling at the scene and the delay in bringing in appropriate experts and the failure to recognize and collect evidence in proper fashion. So you've got a big similarity there. And then the question of affluence and so on, and the reticence of the police to make a move with people who are prestigious, affluent, prominent in the community. Oh, indeed, there are some striking similarities. And then also...
Shifting to the seventh bombshell, Wecht drew striking parallels between the situation and the OJ Simpson trial, emphasizing how affluence could effectively buy justice through superior legal resources and public relations maneuvers. He noted that both scenarios involved suspects with significant wealth and community standing, which bred police reticence to act aggressively, fearing backlash or complications from well-funded defenses. In the Simpson case, where Wecht himself consulted on forensic aspects, the dream team of attorneys like Johnny Cochran and F. Lee Bailey exploited procedural flaws to secure an acquittal, a dynamic Wecht saw mirrored in the hesitancy to pursue charges against prominent figures. This wealth disparity, he argued, created an uneven playing field, where affluent individuals could afford strategies that ordinary suspects could not, ultimately influencing outcomes and perceptions of fairness. Wecht also highlighted bungling at the scene as a shared flaw, comparing the Simpson trial's infamous glove demonstration and blood evidence mishandling to similar early errors in evidence collection in SIM security. In Simpson, unsecured areas led to contamination allegations, while delays in expert involvement allowed for defense challenges on chain of custody, issues Wecht identified as parallel to the recognizing and preserving traces promptly. He stressed how these bungles stemmed from inexperience or underestimation, with police in both instances operating in environments unaccustomed to such scrutiny, leading to overlooked details that defenses later amplified. The reticence toward affluent suspects compounded this, as initial deference might have contributed to sloppy protocols. Much like how Simpson's celebrity status allegedly softened early investigative vigor, the media circus element further tied the two together, with Wecht noting how wealth enabled sophisticated PR spins that shaped narratives, as seen in Simpson's trial becoming a televised spectacle that swayed public opinion. He referenced a subject's mention of the Simpson case in an interview as a veiled warning about pursuing legal routes against well-resourced opponents, implying awareness of how affluence could prolong or derail justice. Wecht's involvement in Simpson, critiquing aspects like wound analysis and blood spatter, informed his view that both cases suffered from delayed expert integration, allowing evidentiary gaps to widen. This bombshell served as a cautionary tale, illustrating systemic vulnerabilities where prominence and money intersected with investigative shortcomings, perpetuating debates on equity in the legal system. Contemporary analyses in 2025 still echo Wecht's comparisons, with discussions at forums like CrimeCon revisiting how wealth influences probes, drawing lines to Simpson's acquittal despite compelling forensics. Recent updates on evidence retesting highlight ongoing procedural critiques, similar to Simpson's post-trial scrutiny, where bungled elements continue to fuel alternative theories. Wecht's insight into these parallels remains a touchstone for examining how affluence can insulate suspects, as seen in calls for reforms to address such disparities in handling. Cyril Wecht's eighth bombshell in his 1998 interview offered a bold prediction that the case would advance to a grand jury, potentially with a few leaks along the way, culminating in indictments against the Ramseys by the end of that year. He envisioned a deliberate but sluggish process in Boulder, where authorities moved at a measured pace. Yet he remained confident that the momentum from the police's recent evidence presentation would push things forward. Wecht's forecast stemmed from his assessment of the investigative buildup, suggesting that once referred, the grand jury would deliberate methly before delivering charges, reflecting his belief in the strength of the accumulated materials. This outlook positioned the Ramseys as central figures facing formal accusations, with Wecht emphasizing that the timeline, though extended, would not derail the outcome he anticipated. The prediction gained traction in light of District Attorney Alex Hunter's announcement in August 1998 to convene a grand jury, aligning partially with Wecht's expectation of progression, though it arrived a couple of months later than his June-end projection. Once assembled in September, the panel, comprising 8 women and 4 men, embarked on a thorough review, meeting intermittently over more than a year to sift through forensic reports, witness statements, and other submissions. Wecht's mention of possible leaks proved prescient, as media reports occasionally surfaced details from the closed sessions, heightening public speculation. By October 1999, the grand jury to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on counts related to child abuse resulting in death and accessory roles, a development that echoed Wecht's confidence in impending charges, even if the timeline stretched beyond his initial estimate into the following year. However, Hunter's decision not to sign the indictments marked a pivotal twist, as he publicly declared the evidence insufficient for prosecution, effectively halting any immediate legal action. This refusal, later revealed through unsealed 2013 court documents, underscored the grand jury's true bills against the couple, validating Wecht's sense that indictments were within reach but thwarted by prosecutorial discretion. The unsigned documents highlighted charges accusing the parents of placing the child in a dangerous situation and assisting in covering up the events, elements Wecht had implied through his advocacy for accountability. His bombshell, while accurate in foreseeing the jury's direction, ultimately highlighted the gap between investigative recommendations and final authority, a frustration that lingered in discussions of the process's integrity. Shifting to the 9th bombshell, which stands out as potentially the most controversial among Wecht's revelations, he positioned John Ramsey as a logical suspect from the outset, particularly in light of indications of prior sensitive mistreatment. Wecht's initial focus on John emerged quickly upon reviewing the details, lasting for the first few minutes or even a week of his analysis, driven by the absence of intruder traces combined with forensic signs of ongoing issues. This suspicion framed John as the obvious choice when external explanations fell short, with Wecht suggesting that the patterns observed made it challenging to look elsewhere within the household dynamic. Central to this bombshell was Wecht's interpretation of the autopsy findings, which revealed inflammation and private area injuries, suggestive of repeated harm over time. He argued these wounds pointed to a history that predated the immediate events, distinguishing them from any acute damage and implying a level of familiarity that external theories could not easily explain. Wecht consulted with pediatric specialists who corroborated the signs of persistent irritation, reinforcing his view that such condition that scrutiny of those with consistent access. This aspect fueled controversy, as it challenged narratives minimizing the injuries, with Wecht insisting the medical evidence demanded consideration in suspect profiling. The bombshell's contentious nature arose from expert opinions, where some dismissed the private area injuries as unrelated or benign, while Wecht and aligned pathologists saw them as indicative of prior sensitive mistreatment. Debates intensified over the autopsy's details, including tissue changes that suggested erosion from repeated exposure to irritants, leading to polarized interpretations in forensic circles. Wecht's stance, detailed in his book, positioned these findings as undermining alternative explanations, making John's role appear more central despite later exonerations based on other evidence like touch DNA. Critics of Wecht's position highlighted the pediatrician's prior assessments, ruling out any history of mistreatment. But Wecht countered that autopsy results overrode such evaluations, emphasizing the physical evidence of private area injuries as a key discrepancy. This bombshell sparked ethical discussions on how such sensitive interpretations should be handled publicly, with Wecht defending his analysis as rooted in pathology rather than speculation. The controversy extended to grand jury deliberations, where similar forensic points were reviewed. though ultimately not pursued, leaving Wecht's suspicion as a lingering point of debate in retrospective analyses. In modern reflections, the ninth bombshell retains its divisive edge, as ongoing DNA retesting in 2025 updates has not resolved the questions around the injuries, with some communities still advocating for re-examination of the autopsy through advanced techniques. Wecht's early suspicion of John, tied to these chronic findings, continues to influence theories favoring internal explanations, even as official stances have shifted. The bombshell's impact lies in its challenge to surface-level narratives, prompting deeper scrutiny of medical records that suggested a pattern of sensitive mistreatment predating the focal events. Dr. Cyril Wecht's 10th bombshell framed the incident as a game gone awry, suggesting an activity that started innocently but spiraled out of control, potentially tied to patterns of household discipline. He portrayed it as a deviant play that had been engaged in before, where the ligature's application inadvertently caused the death. Wecht emphasized that this was not a deliberate act but an accident during a repeated routine, prompting a panicked cover-up through staging elements like the ransom note and repositioning. The housekeeper's input played a role in this narrative, as she speculated that a head injury from a flashlight stemmed from punishment for bedwetting, an idea Wecht acknowledged as simplistic yet possibly rooted in family tensions. This connection highlighted recurring issues with bedwetting, which had led to multiple doctor visits and urinary tract concerns, weaving into Wecht's view of the game as an escalation from disciplinary habits. Wecht delved deeper into the game's mechanics, proposing that the chord's use was part of a familiar setup that misfired, with the participant unable to anticipate the sudden physiological shutdown. He drew from autopsy findings of chronic irritation in sensitive areas to infer a history of similar interactions, though he focused on the accidental nature rather than intent. The bedwetting link added layers, as reports indicated frequent episodes requiring interventions like alarms or protective bedding, which Wecht saw as potential triggers for the game's initiation. In his book, he illustrated how such routines could devolve into riskier behaviors, culminating in the tragedy when control was lost. This bombshell stirred debates, with some viewing the housekeeper's flashlight theory as far-fetched, yet Wecht used it to underscore underlying family dynamics that might explain the deviation from normal play. The game's gone awry aspect, according to Wecht, explained the post-incident staging, where the perpetrator, in shock, inflicted additional blunt force to mask the true sequence, minimizing blood loss to suggest a different cause. He connected this to the bedwetting punishment narrative, positing that disciplinary tools like a flashlight could have been wielded impulsively, aligning with accounts of frustration over persistent issues. Pediatric records showing repeated consultations for related problems supported this, as Wecht argued they indicated a pattern that could lead to such an unfortunate escalation. Critics found the idea controversial, but Wecht maintained it fit the forensic puzzle, where the game's elements left traces inconsistent with an external event. Shifting to the 11th bombshell, Wecht scrutinized the ligature details, particularly the white nylon cord. He received postmortem images showing the cord's placement, which prompted his call for broader context to interpret its meaning fully. The binding, barely more than a symbolic loop, suggested it wasn't intended for real restraint, raising questions about staging to create a false narrative. Wecht criticized his own reference to it as a rope, stressing that the thin cord's material mattered, as it appeared household-sourced and improvised rather than professional. To unpack this, Wecht insisted on additional context like bedroom photos, family living habits, and the ransom note's content, which helped assess if the cord originated from everyday items, such as art supplies. The focus of the cord over clothing and lacking struggle marks implied post-event application. This mismatch, he argued, pointed to an attempt to simulate bondage without practicality, necessitating views of the home's interior to understand accessibility and intent. Leaked documents and scene images provided by sources allowed Wecht to evaluate how the ligature fit the overall setup, including a heart drawn on the left hand, adding an enigmatic layer. Wecht's analysis extended to the cord's forensic implications, where its looseness around the wrists, allowing easy removal, undermined any real kidnapping scenario, while the neck's embedding caused furrows indicative of force. He advocated for contextual elements like the family's routines and room layouts to explain why the binding was asymmetric, suggesting it was added for appearance rather than function. In his examinations, the cord's material matched items found in the home, reinforcing the need for lifestyle details to trace its origin and purpose. This bombshell highlighted Wecht's methodical approach, blending pathology with environmental factors to challenge simplistic interpretations. Contemporary discussions in 2025 still reference ligature insights, with retesting of similar items underscoring their evidentiary value. The looseness debate persists in forensic reviews, where experts use advanced imaging to model the bindings, confirming the staging elements Wecht identified. calls for independent analysis of his demand for context, as digital reconstructions of the home provide new ways to visualize the cord's role. The heart marking adds intrigue, with theories linking it to personal symbols requiring family background for clarity. Wecht's bombshell thus endures as a cornerstone for understanding the binding's narrative function. Based on what Wecht has said in his 11 bombshells, we can already form an idea of his perspective on this case, and his main hypothesis. Let's delve deeper into this hypothesis to find out who is really at the center of the case, who covered it up, and most importantly, who is the main suspect. Dr. Cyril Wecht's central hypothesis posits that the tragic outcome was not a deliberate act by an outsider, but rather an intended mishap arising from a deviant game within the household that spiraled out of control, followed by frantic efforts to mask the truth. He envisioned a scenario where familiar routines devolved into chaos, leading to the use of a device that caused the fatal error, with the participants unable to signal distress or halt the progression. Wecht drew from his forensic expertise to argue that the entire setup, including the ransom note and positioning of JonBenét's, was hastily contrived to divert attention from the internal origins. This view rejected any external involvement, insisting instead on a family-centered explanation where private interactions crossed into dangerous territory, prompting a cover-up that transformed the accident into something resembling a staged intrusion. His analysis stressed the improbability of a stranger's precision without leaving traces, pointing instead to those with intimate knowledge of the home and its routines as the key players in both the mishap and the deception. At the heart of Wecht's hypothesis lies the Ramsey family itself, with John and Patsy Ramsey emerging as the primary focus due to their positions of authority and access within the household. Wecht highlighted the dynamics of an affluent, image-conscious family could foster environments where certain behaviors went unchecked, leading to the unfortunate escalation. John, in particular, drew Wecht's scrutiny as a figure capable of influencing the sequence of events, given his leadership role and the way the staging seemed tailored to protect the family's reputation. Patsy complemented this, with Wecht noting her potential contributions to elements like the note, which bore stylistic markers familiar to the home. The older sibling occasionally entered the periphery of Wecht's considerations, but he kept the emphasis squarely on the parents, viewing them as the architects of the household's private world where such a game could occur. This familial centricity underscored Wecht's belief that the answers resided not in distant suspects but in the immediate circle, where relationships and habits intersected to produce the tragedy. In pinpointing who bore responsibility for JonBenét's death, Wecht's hypothesis leans toward it being an accidental result of the deviant game, with John Ramsey positioned as the main suspect due to his logical proximity and the patterns that suggested repeated engagement in such activities. Wecht reasoned that the game's initiation likely fell to someone with commanding presence in the home, and John's demeanor and actions in the aftermath aligned with someone grappling with unintended consequences. Patsy could share in this role if the game stemmed from disciplinary responses to ongoing issues like bedwetting, which Wecht saw as a possible trigger for the mishap's escalation. The absence of external signs further solidified John's centrality, as Wecht argued that only someone with unrestricted access could execute the sequence without alerting others. This accidental framing absolved outright malice, but assigned culpability for recklessness, with John embodying the hypothesis's core as the figure whose involvement best explained the forensic inconsistencies and the rapid pivot to concealment. The cover-up, in Wecht's view, represented a collaborative effort primarily between John and Patsy to reframe the accident as an external threat, ensuring the family's narrative remained intact. Patsy took a leading hand in crafting the ransom note, its verbose and dramatic style reflecting a personal touch that handwriting experts could not fully exclude her from. John, meanwhile, managed the physical aspects, such as relocating JonBenét and adding elements to enhance the illusion of intrusion, leveraging his composure to guide the immediate response. Wecht portrayed this partnership as born of desperation, where both parents simpers their actions to protect one another and the household's image, delaying cooperation with authorities to buy time for alignment. Their selective media engagements and references to other high-profile cases served as subtle deflections, further entrenching the cover-up in Wecht's analysis. This joint operation explained the scene's contrived elements, from the note's bogus demands to the inconsistent bindings, all orchestrated to shift blame outward while concealing the game's fatal misstep. Wecht's hypothesis extends beyond individual roles to critique how such a cover-up could persist, attributing it to the parents' resourcefulness in manipulating perceptions through legal and public relations strategies. John's background in business provided a pragmatic edge to the staging, ensuring details like the note's amount tied loosely to personal finances without overt exposure. Patsy's flair for presentation, evident in household aesthetics, translated to the note's elaborate wording, which Wet saw as an overcompensation masking the truth. Together, they navigated the aftermath by limiting access to information, a tactic that Wecht believed prolonged the deception and frustrated investigators. This layered concealment not only shielded the immediate participants, but also preserved the family's external facade, allowing them to portray themselves as victims rather than instigators of the mishap. Delving further, Wecht's assignment of roles reflects his forensic-driven logic, where John's suspicion arose from the seamless integration of household items into the setup, implying his oversight in the game's execution and cleanup. Patsy's involvement in the note positioned her as a key architect of the misdirection, her contributions ensuring the narrative's coherence despite its flaws. The hypothesis's emphasis on accident over intent humanized the parents to some extent, portraying them as flawed individuals caught in a web of poor judgment rather than cold calculators, yet it firmly held them accountable for the escalation and subsequent obfuscation. Wecht's repeated calls for charges against both underscored this dual responsibility, viewing the cover-up as a testament to their unity in crisis. The game's connection to bedwetting punishment added nuance to Wecht's roles, suggesting Patsy's potential influence if disciplinary habits formed the game's foundation, while John's authority might have overseen its progression. This interplay highlighted how everyday frustrations could morph into riskier interactions, with both parents complicit in allowing such patterns to persist. Wecht's analysis avoided absolving them, instead using the forensic mismatches, like the device's application, to illustrate how the mishap's cover demanded coordinated effort, with John handling logistics and Patsy the communicative facade. Ultimately, Wecht's hypothesis paints a portrait of a family where private lapses led to public deception, with John and Patsy at the epicenter, sharing the burden of the accident's cause and its concealment. Their roles intertwined seamlessly in his view, each contributing unique strengths to sustain the illusion, from John's strategic placement of clues to Patsy's crafted messaging. This collaborative framework explained the investigation's challenges, as the parents' alignment thwarted easy resolutions, leaving Wecht to advocate for piercing the veil through rigorous forensic scrutiny. One aspect that has drawn significant attention in discussions surrounding John Ramsey's interactions with his daughter involves the frequency of medical visits to her pediatrician, Dr. Francesco Beef. Over the course of about 3 years, records indicate that the child was seen by Dr. Beef approximately 27 to 33 times, which some observers flagged as unusually high for a young girl without apparent chronic health issues. These appointments covered a range of common childhood ailments, such as ear infections, colds, and minor injuries. But the sheer number prompted questions about whether they might point to underlying patterns of sensitive mistreatment. Critics have suggested that repeated doctor visits could serve as a way to monitor or address recurring private area injuries without raising alarms, especially if the pediatrician did not probe deeply into potential causes. Dr. Beef himself has consistently maintained that he observed no signs of any mistreatment during these consultations, describing the visits as routine and the child as generally healthy and happy. However, the volume of appointments, averaging nearly one per month, has fueled speculation in various forums, with some pointing out that typical pediatric care for a child of that age might involve far fewer checks unless there were persistent concerns. In one detailed account, it's noted that the doctor was not only involved in regular office visits but also responded to phone calls from the family, which added to the overall interaction frequency, though exact numbers of those calls remain unclear. Delving deeper into the medical history, some analyses highlight specific instances where the child presented with symptoms that could retrospectively be linked to sensitive mistreatment, such as inflammation or discomfort in sensitive areas. Though Dr. Beef's reports did not flag these as suspicious at the time, the pediatrician conducted examinations that were standard for the complaints brought forward, but he did not perform more invasive checks unless deemed necessary, which has led to debates about whether subtle indicators of private area injuries were overlooked. For instance, in the 3-year span, there were at least a few visits related to minor facial injuries or other physical concerns, which some have interpreted as part of a broader pattern requiring frequent medical attention. John Ramsey, as the father, was involved in these healthcare decisions alongside his wife, and the family's reliance on Dr. Biff extended beyond typical patient-doctor relationships. The doctor was even present during family gatherings and provided support in non-medical capacities. This close association has raised eyebrows, with suggestions that it might have created a dynamic where potential red flags for sensitive mistreatment were not escalated to authorities. Moreover, the fact that the family signed waivers allowing access to medical records only after certain pressures has been cited as indicative of a desire to control the narrative around these visits. Further scrutiny of the doctor visits reveals inconsistencies in how the frequency was justified. Dr. Beef explained the high number by noting the child's participation in activities that could lead to common illnesses, like exposure to other kids in social settings. But this hasn't satisfied all skeptics who argue that even active children don't typically require such intensive medical oversight. In one interview, the pediatrician emphasized that he saw no evidence of any form of mistreatment, repeating that the injuries observed were the usual scrapes and bruises expected in childhood. Yet, the persistence of certain complaints, including those potentially tied to private area injuries, has been highlighted in discussions as a possible sign that the visits were more than precautionary. John Ramsey's role in facilitating these appointments is often underscored, as he was described as a hands-on parent in some accounts, yet distant in others, which adds layers to interpretations of why the medical interventions were so frequent. Some have speculated that the pattern could attempt to document normalcy, thereby masking any sensitive mistreatment that might have caused recurring needs for care. The doctor's later involvement in providing statements and even administering medication to family members outside of standard practice has been questioned, suggesting a level of loyalty that might have influenced his assessments. Shifting focus to accounts of John Ramsey's demeanor within the family, numerous stories portray him as exhibiting behaviors that struck others as unusually cold or indifferent. Descriptions from those who knew the family paint a picture of a man who maintained a composed, almost detached exterior, even in moments of emotional intensity. This perceived emotional reserve has been linked to his interactions with his children and spouse, where he was sometimes seen as prioritizing logic and control over overt displays of affection. In family settings, John was often described as the steady, unflappable figure, but this steadiness bordered on aloofness for some observers who noted a lack of warmth in his daily engagements. Such traits have been recounted in various narratives, suggesting that his approach to parenting and family life carried an undercurrent of emotional distance that could contribute to dynamics involving sensitive mistreatment. Friends and acquaintances have shared anecdotes where John's responses to family matters seemed measured to the point of being impersonal, fueling speculation about deeper relational issues. One particularly recurring story involves John Ramsey's handling of memorabilia related to his eldest daughter from a previous marriage, Beth, who had passed away tragically. Reports indicate that he kept a collage or framed photos of Beth in the bathroom of the family home, a placement that many have found peculiar and indicative of hidden emotional turmoil. This choice to display images of his deceased daughter in such a private, utilitarian space has been interpreted as a way to conceal grief from the rest of the household, or perhaps as a sign of unresolved attachment that manifested in odd ways. Observers have questioned why these photos were not placed in more communal areas, like living rooms or bedrooms, suggesting that the bathroom location allowed for solitary reflection while keeping the sentiment hidden from family view. This behavior has been tied to broader perceptions of John's coldness, as it implies a compartmentalization of emotions that might extend to how he interacted with his living children. In discussions, this detail is often cited as emblematic of a man who processed loss internally, potentially at the expense of fostering open family bonds. Expanding on this, the placement of Beth's photos in the bathroom has sparked debates about what it reveals regarding John's overall family dynamics. Some accounts suggest that he favored mementos of Beth over similar tributes to his other children, which could indicate a selective emotional investment that left some family members feeling sidelined. This perceived favoritism, combined with his reputed indifference, has been woven into narratives questioning whether such detachment played a role in instances of sensitive mistreatment. Family photos from various occasions show John in composed poses, but critics point to subtle cues, like averted gazes or minimal physical contact, that hint at underlying coolness. In one visual analysis, the solemnity in group images is attributed partly to John's influence, where his reserved nature set the tone for interactions. These elements together paint a portrait of a father whose behaviors, while not overtly hostile, carried an air of emotional unavailability that has been scrutinized in relation to family well-being. Another layer to John's reported strange attitudes involves his responses during family crises or everyday stresses, where his calmness was sometimes seen as unnervingly detached. Accounts from those close to the family describe instances where John would withdraw into work or personal reflection, leaving emotional labor to others, which reinforced perceptions of coldness. This trait extended to how he commemorated Beth, with the bathroom photos serving as a private shrine that avoided integrating her memory into shared family spaces. Speculation about this setup allowed John to indulge in solitary mourning, potentially exacerbating feelings of isolation within the household. Combined with the frequent medical visits, These behaviors have been analyzed as part of a pattern where oversight of the child's health intersected with emotional detachment, possibly overlooking or contributing to sensitive mistreatment indicators like recurring private area injuries. The doctor's role in this ecosystem is also relevant, as his frequent interactions with the family might have normalized what others saw as excessive medical involvement. In exploring these elements further, the intersection of John's family attitudes and the medical routine becomes evident. The high number of doctor visits, while defended as necessary, aligns with descriptions of a household where physical concerns were addressed promptly but emotional ones perhaps less so. John's placement of Beth's photos in the bathroom has been likened to a hidden ritual, suggesting a man who compartmentalized his life in ways that could inadvertently foster environments prone to sensitive mistreatment. Observers note that this odd choice might reflect a deeper indifference to how such actions affected the family's collective psyche, with the private display symbolizing unshared grief. Meanwhile, the pediatrician's assurance that no mistreatment was evident during the 27-plus visits has been countered by arguments that subtle signs, such as patterns in private area injuries, required more scrutiny. John's involvement in scheduling and attending these appointments underscores his central role, yet his reported cold demeanor raises questions about the emotional context surrounding them. Continuing this thread, stories from family associates highlight moments where John's indifference manifested in subtle ways, such as brief interactions with his children that lacked enthusiasm, contrasting with more animated family members. The bathroom photos of Beth, in particular, have been dissected as a quirky habit that borders on the eccentric, potentially indicating a detachment from normal grieving processes. This has led to broader interpretations linking such behaviors to the frequent doctor visits, where the focus on physical health might have overshadowed emotional or relational strains that could tie into sensitive mistreatment. Dr. Baus' records, while comprehensive, have gaps that some attribute to the family's influence, further complicating the picture of why the visits were so numerous. Ultimately, these intertwined aspects, medical frequency and peculiar family habits, continue to be examined for insights into John's approach to parenthood. From the turn of the millennium onward, Siril Wet remained steadfast in promoting his hypothesis that the Ramsey family was central to the tragedy, viewing it as an accidental mishap during a deviant activity followed by a panicked cover-up. In the early 2000s, he continued to appear on television programs and in documentaries, reiterating his rejection of the intruder theory and emphasizing forensic inconsistencies that pointed inward. Wet's 2003 book, Mortal Evidence, revisited similar themes, using his experiences to bolster arguments against external narratives. While he lectured at universities and conferences, often facing audiences divided between supporters of familial involvement and those favoring unknown perpetrators. By 2006, amid personal legal troubles, including federal charges of misusing his office resources, which were later dropped in 2008 after a mistrial, Wecht's public profile took a hit, with critics accusing him of sensationalism and leveraging controversies for attention. These allegations distracted from his work but did not deter him. Instead, he used the experience to highlight systemic issues in prosecutions, drawing parallels to what he saw as prosecutorial reluctance in high-profile matters. The 2008 exoneration of the Ramsays based on touch DNA from an unknown male presented a major challenge to Wecht's hypothesis, as it seemed to support an outsider's role. Wet vehemently disputed this, arguing the DNA was likely contamination from manufacturing or handling, not direct evidence of involvement. In interviews that year, including on CNN and true crime podcasts, he doubled down, citing forensic principles to claim the samples were too minimal and degraded to be conclusive. This stance isolated him from some colleagues embraced the DNA findings, leading to heated debates at forensic conventions where Wet was labeled outdated or biased. Despite this, he persisted, contributing to 2010's media specials and co-authoring updates in reissued books, like the 2016 edition of his original work on the case, where he incorporated critiques of the DNA exoneration to refine his internal accident theory. Entering the 2010s, Wecht faced health issues and aging, yet continued advocating through his autobiography, The Life and Deaths of Cyril Wecht. In 2020, dedicating sections to defending his Ramsey stance against evolving technologies like genetic genealogy. He encountered pushback from online communities and newer experts who favored intruder hypotheses, with Reddit forums and YouTube analyses often dismissing his views as speculative. The 2013 revelation of unsigned grand jury indictments against the parents briefly vindicated him, as he cited it in talks to argue prosecutorial timidity had obstructed justice, but this was overshadowed by the DNA narrative's dominance. In his final years before passing in 2022, Wecht grappled with legacy concerns, as documentaries like those on Netflix in 2024 revisited his contributions, but framed them amid controversy, accusing him of ignoring exculpatory evidence. Posthumously, his hypothesis endures in true crime circles, discussed at 2025 events like CrimeCon. Though challenges from advanced DNA retesting persist, testing the resilience of his lifelong pursuit of forensic truth. The Ramsey case stands as a profound testament to the enduring lessons embedded in unresolved mysteries, teaching us that even amid tragedy, individual tenacity can illuminate paths forward in ways institutions often cannot. It reveals how ordinary people, researchers, journalists, and everyday observers can wield extraordinary influence, piecing together fragments of truth through persistence and ingenuity. From the outset, the saga underscored that one person's deep dive into evidence could challenge official narratives, sparking global conversations and pressuring systems to evolve. This empowerment of the individual reminds us that justice isn't solely the domain of authorities. It's amplified by those who refuse to accept stagnation, using accessible tools like public records and forensic logic to demand accountability. In an era of information overload, the case shows how solitary voices can cut through noise, fostering a culture where personal inquiry drives collective progress. Figures like Dr. Cyril Wecht and Lou Smith exemplify this individual impact, each constructing monumental investigative frameworks despite diverging viewpoints. Wecht, with his forensic precision, dissected details to advocate for internal explanations, building a body of work through books, lectures, and media that forced revaluations of evidence long after initial probes faltered. His rigorous analysis, grounded in pathology and law, offered invaluable perspectives on how overlooked clues could reshape understandings, even as they stirred controversy. Smith, conversely, championed external theories with equal vigor, compiling dossiers on potential suspects and using visual aids to map scenarios that kept alternative possibilities alive. Though their hypotheses clashed, Wecht seeing familial orchestration where Smith envisioned an intruder, their shared commitment to exhaustive scrutiny enriched the discourse. Both demonstrated that one investigator's dedication could generate volumes of insight, proving that conflicting lenses don't diminish value but rather enhance the mosaic of truth, encouraging others to engage critically. The case also illuminates how hypotheses form and endure over time, evolving with new interpretations and technologies while underscoring the need for multifaceted views. As years passed, theories proliferated, from internal accidents to outsider abductions, each gaining traction through media, books, and online forums, showing how narratives adapt to cultural shifts and fresh data. This proliferation teaches that the more hypotheses emerge, the more essential it becomes to maintain a broad perspective, questioning assumptions and weighing contradictions without dogmatic adherence. It prompts viewers to cultivate skepticism, asking not just, what happened, but why this explanation now? Such inquiry guards against echo chambers, fostering a balanced approach where diverse ideas coexist, ultimately empowering individuals to form informed opinions. The Ramsey saga, through its labyrinth of theories, reminds us that truth often lies in the interplay of viewpoints, urging personal vigilance in navigating complexity.